U.S. Marines already in Baghdad. Having said that, overnight, a U.S. Army officer told us of senior rank that it appears that the majority of Iraqi forces in Baghdad have given up. That does not mean they've surrendered. It does mean, however, they've deserted and gone to ground. There are intelligence reports suggesting there are some Fedayeen units now which have embedded themselves, integrated themselves into civilian neighborhoods around Baghdad, and it's anticipated there will still be attempts by these Fedayeen and paramilitary groups to ambush any U.S. forces coming into the city, the aim being, of course, on the part of the remaining Iraqis to draw American blood. Having said that, there is also an intelligence report out that suggests the Iraqis are going to be using emergency vehicles, ambulances and fire engines as suicide vehicles to attack U.S. military convoys in Baghdad. Walter Rogers, CNN, with the U.S. Army 7th Cavalry on the southern outskirts.
Rockets being launched from Baghdad airport this morning as units here support the push into the city. Overhead, A-10 Warthogs circled, picking out Iraqi air defences. This one releasing defensive decoys as it climbs away. But even they are no guarantee. One A-10 was shot down near here today, the pilot lucky to be rescued. Ground forces have suffered casualties. These soldiers were rehearsing for a memorial service for 6 of their comrades killed earlier this week, 3 in an RPG attack and 3 in a road accident. This army is increasingly concerned about accidental casualties during combat. This is 2-4 Artillery's missile launcher Anger Management in Kuwait 3 weeks ago. This was it this morning after a fire in the launcher module.
We just ran. Everybody's there saying, get out of there, because of the munitions that were about to go off. We went and dived in the foxholes.
Although American forces control the airport, there are still one-off attacks from beyond the perimeter and on the convoys moving in and out. Overall, though, things are clearly going their way.
Overall, I think that the 3rd Infantry Division and all of the soldiers that are part of that big divisional combat team are meeting the Secretary of the Army and Chief of Staff of the Army's charter, which is we meet the non-negotiable contract with the American people to fight and win our nation's wars, and I think we're doing exactly that.
Gunfire and fighting have been audible around the airport today, and everyone here hopes that their colleagues at the front can soon get the job done, topple this regime, and get them home. No one knows when that time will be. Everyone feels it is getting rapidly closer. Carl Dinnan, Channel 4 News at Baghdad Airport.
Military now has an armored force in northern Iraq. Air Force C-17 cargo planes have begun airlifting M1A1 Abrams battle tanks into the Harir airfield, which was secured by U.S. paratroopers from the 173rd Airborne Brigade less than 2 weeks ago. This is the long-awaited arrival of the so-called Herc and the Merc in military parlance. The Herc, the heavy-ready company, are the Abrams battle tanks. The Merc, the medium-ready company, are Bradley fighting vehicles and M113 armored personnel carriers. This armor package comes from the 1st Battalion 63rd Armor of the 1st Infantry Division, which is based in Vilseck, Germany. Soldiers from the 1st Infantry Division say they believe this is the first time that Abrams tanks have been airlifted into a combat zone. What this armor package does is gives the 173rd Airborne Brigade offensive capabilities, the ability to consider taking on Iraqi mechanized infantry divisions. The brigade is equipped with Javelin anti-tank missiles, but those are usually reserved for defensive measures. Now, with the tank package, the 173rd can consider moving beyond the green line of Kurdish-controlled territory and into Baghdad-controlled Iraq. It could represent a shift in the role of U.S. forces in northern Iraq. Steve Nettleton, CNN, reporting from the Harir airfield in
The crowd is chanting many things. Among it, the man is an enemy of God, meaning Saddam Hussein. He is an enemy of God, the crowd chants. Okay, here we come back now to pictures. You can see just about anything not nailed down, mainly in government buildings. Also, however, we're told in some stores being carted away. Ruler Amin, our correspondent who's been monitoring these events on the Jordanian border, telling us that her read of this is partly, yes, grabbing stuff and taking it away, but also a celebration that they can do it, that they can enter what were off-limits government buildings and basically do what they want. We've seen some amazing pictures coming in from the streets of Baghdad. US officials, however, cautioning that the battle for the city, the fighting may not be over, is not yet over, that there are remnants of paramilitary groups in and around the city, and they are not saying that this is over by a long shot. Chairs, tables, a freezer was removed. And earlier we saw a curious picture, a man carrying a tire away from the scene. And perhaps the most extraordinary picture, I think, a man leaving a government building carrying only a vase of plastic flowers. Something you would never have seen in Baghdad until this moment. Posters of Saddam Hussein being torn down, spat on and trodden on.
Unless they felt it was really safe to do so. Well, look at that. They're out of their vehicles. Those are the scenes in Baghdad this morning. If you are just joining us, these are scenes in Baghdad this morning. American soldiers, obviously very cautiously moving around. There's an American soldier with children there and everything else. The American soldiers moving very cautiously, but pretty confident that they now are the only form of authority in Baghdad. Not that there's much authority. There's an awful lot of looting going on. And the American military spokesmen have been saying that one should be cautious. This might not be the end of the Battle of Baghdad, they've said. They have also talked about moving on to bomb Tikrit, the town some 70 miles north of Baghdad, which is Saddam Hussein's hometown. So the focus of the war is definitely going to move on. But the capital, as far as one can tell, is now completely out of the hands of Saddam Hussein, his sons, or anyone else who might be tempted to take power in his name. We can go now, we'll leave these pictures in Baghdad just for the moment.
That something is changing, and here in the predominantly Shiite area, which we are seeing here in the eastern part of the city, close to Saddam City, close to the Army Canal, in an area which has traditionally very much been under the yoke of Saddam Hussein's security apparatus. Even with artillery permanent pointed at this part of Baghdad, there must be concern about what happens in the next hours and the next days, because they may be wanting to vent their anger at Saddam Hussein. But next comes the issue of who is going to control them. As we've been hearing from our correspondents and as we're seeing from other correspondents across Baghdad at the moment, there is simply no sign of the security apparatus, no sign of the ubiquitous police cars or limited signs of the Fedayeen and those who were providing some semblance of order simply by the fact of being there and whatever kind of overbearing hand that implied. But here, we are seeing a series of images in one part of the city. What's difficult to give you is an overall perspective at this stage. Thinking back to Bucharest, to the Romania Revolution, to what happened in Belgrade with the fall of Milosevic and also the Russia Revolution, these things are often difficult to give you an accurate sense of with everything unfolding in this piecemeal way. How are other people in Baghdad reading and hearing what is going on? Here then the images in one part of Baghdad, but still deep concern in the Arab world about if this is the case, if Saddam Hussein's rule is coming to an end. What does that mean?
Presumably celebrating. They are no supporters of Saddam Hussein, as we know, but these pictures, initially the celebrations started out in Baghdad this morning, and it looks like they are fanning across to some other parts of the country. These pictures are coming through live to us from northern Iraq, Erbil.
And continually over the last few days, but slowly, special forces, American special forces and Kurdish Peshmergas have been moving south towards Mosul and Kirkuk, which are the oil fields under Saddam Hussein control for the present time.
Well, if you are just joining us, let us bring you up to date with the unfolding picture in Baghdad and Iraq this morning. There have been dramatic developments.
We're a rebel. Of course, they would melt away as well.
One brief question to you, Haja. What about the rest of the Arab world? There's so much anti-American and indeed anti-British feeling. Is that going to melt away now?
I hope they will have some humility to admit that they were wrong about their brother Arabs in Iraq. But I don't think so. I think everybody in this opposition to war movement.
Julian, thank you very much indeed, Haja Tamurian. Julian Mannion is our correspondent in northern Iraq. Julian, we're looking at scenes at the moment here of rejoicing in Erbil. Tell us what you know of what's happening near where you are.
Well, first of all, there is, I understand, tremendous rejoicing in Erbil as news comes through of what appears to be the collapse of the regime in Baghdad. What I can tell you is that some of that rejoicing will be taking place, for example, in the hotel where we've been staying, where people have been glued to a large screen television almost 24 hours a day watching developments. And obviously the Kurds are extremely anti-Saddam. They've been fighting Saddam for years. They've suffered at his hands. They've been gassed, arrested, tortured, and any news that the regime may finally be tottering or even have collapsed is enormously welcome to the Kurdish population of northern Iraq. Where we are, it is slightly different because we're up at the front line just outside Mosul. And once again, we're in one of these puzzling situations where the Iraqi army has pulled back some distance, maybe 5 to 10 miles again, and very little is at the moment filling the vacuum. There are some Kurdish Peshmerga up here, but frankly, there are more journalists than there are Peshmerga. Where we are right on the road next to an American Special Forces unit, which is halted on the road.
Julian,
they are waiting. They are waiting further instructions to go forward, and we will go forward with them.
Thank you very much indeed. We have to go now back to Baghdad and to our man there, Ian Glover-James. Let's have a look. There are pictures from Baghdad. Well, they're sticking at the moment, but we'll see them again. Ian Glover-James, what's the latest as you know it?
Today, anarchy prevails.
Well, it's fairly quiet here in the city centre, apart from the occasional small arms fire, which, as I said earlier, is almost certainly celebration. I don't think there is any organised resistance left in the city, certainly in the southeastern area where I went this morning with a ITV News team, and we saw looting, we saw some small arms fire, but above all we saw jubilation, we saw enthusiasm, and we saw happy scenes on the streets as Iraqis met American soldiers, heard American soldiers were coming, and seemed to shed themselves of their fears. We saw them set fire, ignite a portrait of Saddam Hussein, the former president. We saw them throwing petrol on it. We saw them hurling rocks at it. This was a huge concrete painting of the president on a wall of a security building, a place that no ordinary Iraqi would approach without some trepidation. It was in flames. We saw the office furniture coming out, and we saw the building being ransacked. And further on, when we finally met American soldiers, American Marines, we saw them being greeted with unbridled enthusiasm by the ordinary Iraqi population. In fact, our own driver, who's worked for us for many years in Baghdad here, stepped forward. He could not constrain himself. He was offering them advice about where sniping might come from. There is a deep-seated and profound feeling of jubilation and, more than that, of relief here among the vast majority of people in Baghdad.
Possibility that while there are militia gunmen out there, that this could turn into another Beirut.
Oh, there is very much that possibility, and I'm sure that we have to be as cautious as we can, and indeed they are being cautious in Doha. But the Iraqi resistance hasn't completely crumbled. The entire population hasn't come out to welcome the coalition troops as liberators. This is very much a kind of critical juncture to see what will happen next. And as we discussed earlier, for troops who are still fighting, but also trying to fulfill a policing function, there are some very fine lines to be trodden. And the British are having problems treading in Basra. They're being successful by all accounts. But I think for the Americans, in some ways, in Baghdad, this would be quite a new thing.
Probably letting off steam. I think it's important they do this. Better they do it against government and authority targets than they do elsewhere. And what's interesting is, of course, it spreads. Once you see it in Basra and Baghdad,
northern Iraq now.
Exactly.
Now this, of course, is Kurdish-controlled and always has been, or
yes.
at least the last 10 years or so. But presumably they're listening to their radios, they're getting a sense of what's happening in Baghdad, and they hope the whole country is going to collapse.
Well, the one danger that there is here is that we're starting to see nationalistic symbols coming up here. There are a lot of people holding up banners and are holding up portraits of national leaders. What the Americans don't want to see is a separate Kurdistan. And what the other leaders don't want to see, Iran and Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, the neighbouring countries don't want to see either, is a separate Kurdistan. So they're going to have to be careful that this doesn't take on momentum for some sort of uprising by the Kurds and some sort of creation of a de facto...
Taking positions, pointing their guns as the media point their cameras at the soldiers. The main risk at the moment from those pictures to the incoming US troops would be running over a journalist. Photographers scampering around trying to get pictures of the US military rolling into the very heart of Baghdad. They first started this operation, I think it was Saturday, on the very outskirts of Baghdad with what they were calling thunder runs, going in and out, forays into the city. Then they discovered they weren't getting much resistance, so they stopped and they parked on the western side of the Tigris River, now very much on the eastern side. A traffic jam of media vehicles there. Those orange coloured things on the roof signals to Allied coalition bombers not to bomb their vehicles. It's a signal to pilots. White flags as Iraqis come out. You see the troops, obviously very wary, the troops here. There are still, without doubt, remnants of the Fedayeen Saddam and the Special Republican Guard, Special Forces, Secret Police, intelligence officers who have evaporated, as our Walt Rogers put it earlier, faded away into the city. That does not mean they have gone. They have given up, as Walt put it, but they have not surrendered. They are still in the city, they still have their weapons, and you're going to see some very wary troops there, despite the media wandering around and people of Baghdad coming out to see the forces as they enter this city. Fairly subdued crowd, it must be said. Although the vast majority do appear to be media. Little slice of history unfolding before you now as US troops in the very center of Baghdad. American Humvee coming forward now, joining the traffic jam. Something Baghdad people would no doubt welcome, a traffic jam. It's been several days of bombardments and shooting. Collateral damage as well for the civilians of Baghdad. Red Cross officials saying that they have lost count. In fact, they stopped counting the number of civilian dead and wounded as a result of this conflict. Main roundabout in Baghdad. Again, even with the media wandering around there, and have seen some local Baghdad residents coming out to greet this, well, it is an extraordinary sight, whichever way you want to look at it. You're going to find a lot of very, well, not nervous, but very cautious soldiers. Keeping a lookout for potential danger. Marty Savage reporting in the southern suburbs of Baghdad just a few minutes ago about an exchange between the Marines that he is with and what they believed was a sniper. Must be quite a sight for these soldiers to come in and essentially be greeted by 50 or 60 journalists. Initially, the Marines pushed into the capital from the east early Wednesday. Reports of cheering, locals and flowers being thrown at the Marines. The Marines taking very little notice. They had their eyes looking elsewhere for potential danger. We've heard chants of Bush, Bush, Bush and America, America. Of course, when an invading army comes into your city, you are likely to say things like that. One would assume that many elements of the Republican Guard, the regular army and the irregulars have mingled in with the local population, and that is what concerns US troops as they enter the city. Many people, no doubt, genuine in their welcoming of the US forces, but there's going to be a lot of caution as to who is who. .6:41 in the afternoon, Baghdad time, and we are seeing now a traffic jam of armoured vehicles. Bradley fighting vehicles, armoured personnel carriers. And I'm delighted to have joining us here in Kuwait City, Nick Robertson, having made the journey from Baghdad, expelled, going to Jordan, and now here in Kuwait City seeing something quite extraordinary. Nick, you're the one with good geographical perspective. Where is it? What's happening?
Well, this is right outside the Palestine Hotel where the journalists have been located in Baghdad since the war began. The roundabout that the troops are surrounding at this time contains a monument built to Saddam Hussein, put up last year for his birthday, just less than a year ago, put up for the 28th of April, and it didn't seem to last but a year. It's still standing in the middle of the roundabout there. These pictures are coming from camera positions located right at the back of the Palestine Hotel. We're looking down across the street there outside the back of the Palestine Hotel. Certainly a changed day for the journalists in the hotel. They've been saying up until now, every morning when they got up and went downstairs, they were hoping for the day when the Ministry of Information press office and press center in the foyer of the hotel, waiting for the day when those press representatives, minders as the journalists got to call them, were no longer there. Well, this was that morning. They were gone through the day. And we're looking down at that roundabout now that has that statue in the right-hand corner. You can just see on the round plinth, a statue of President Saddam Hussein, one of those typical statues with his hand raised. That statue put up just a little less than a year ago for his birthday last year.
We saw earlier, Nick, in Saddam City, which of course is a very anti-Saddam, ironically named place, very anti-Saddam population there. A lot of people on the street cheering, chanting. And we are not, despite obviously what is a very tense situation there with troops everywhere, we're not seeing many people on the street. There's really just dozens of journalists.
Well, the situation in downtown Baghdad has perhaps been a little different in some of the locations where people have come out in their communities and felt safe enough to celebrate. Even early in the morning this morning, when people were considering, journalists were considering crossing the bridge over the river to the other side where coalition troops were stationed, it was still considered dangerous. There was still gunfights going on, still incoming fire to anyone who tried to cross the bridge. That has changed through the day, and perhaps we will begin in the center of the city to see more people coming out. I was talking with somebody in the hotel just a few minutes ago, and he was talking with the manager, and the thing that the manager in the hotel was concerned about most was security. The person I was talking with on the phone said the manager wants one thing right now. He wants the Marines to show up outside his hotel because he wants guaranteed security. He was concerned about looters and the potential for the breakdown of law and order. So his question less than an hour ago already seems to be answered, Michael.
Could not have more security, really, when you look at it from that situation. Now, this question of looting, Nick, it was very spirited looting that we saw earlier. People coming out of government buildings with everything from a vase of plastic flowers to a car tyre to what looked to be a very ornate vase, and perhaps significantly documents as well. This is something the US said it would control. The British had problems with it in Basra, and the US said that it would get straight away onto the issue of security. That's obviously important, isn't it?
It's important for so many of the residents of Baghdad. The people who would be doing the looting would very likely be in a relative minority. Talking with some of my colleagues before we left Baghdad, that was their biggest concern. They thought perhaps, yes, we can ride out the war, we can stay in our houses through the bombing, but what happens afterwards? How long will that breakdown in law and order last? Everyone expected there to be looting, quite wholesale looting, and they expected that the neighborhoods that would be looted first would very likely be the more upmarket neighborhoods, and